This is a production of Cornell University Library.
So with that, let me turn to our talk today, and it's my pleasure to introduce Mike Webster, the director of the Macaulay Library of Sound at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, and also the Robert G. Engel Professor of Ornithology in the Cornell Department of Neurobiology and Behavior. Mike received his undergraduate training in zoology at the University of California in San Diego, and his PhD in neurobiology and behavior here at Cornell. He was a professor in biological sciences at Washington State before returning to join the faculty here at Cornell in 2009. As a teacher, Professor Webster introduces students to the field of animal behavior, instructing undergraduates in their first science-based explorations of the living world, and guiding graduate students in their mastery of the current frontiers in neurobiology and evolutionary science. As a researcher, Mike has studied sexual selection and the mating behavior of wild birds in North America, the New World tropics, and Australia, focusing on the evolution of plumage and song signals and the effects of ecological factors on reproductive strategies. His research is published widely in leading journals such as Evolution, Proceedings of the Royal Society, and Behavioral Ecology. As director of the Macaulay Library, Mike is also dedicated to outreach that helps others experience and appreciate animal behavior and the evolutionary processes that have shaped our natural world. His outreach efforts range from giving a recent plenary talk to about 1,500 professional ornithologists at the 6th North American Ornithological Conference to doing a recent Living on Earth radio broadcast about the impact of environmental change on the evolution of birdsong. So in his talk today, Mike will again be focusing on the question of change, only this time change that's happening thanks to the impact of some new technologies within the study of ornithology itself. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Webster.
Thanks for that nice intro. It's thrilling to be here. I'm actually impressed with all the things that are going on in Mann Library, and I guess as a book-loving techie geek who likes treats, I'm in the right place. Yeah. And to be honest, with the nice weather outside and the confusion of schedules, I didn't think anybody would be here. So I'm really thrilled you guys found this room. Thank you very much for being here. What I wanted to talk about today is something that's actually been the backbone of ornithological research, biological research for decades, if not centuries. And that's the biological research collection. So these collections of specimens that bring together, skins and bones and things like that of living organisms so that they can be studied and measured and used for research have been around for a long time, and they're very useful. In fact, Audubon himself was a collector, and you can find specimens that Audubon collected in some of the collections around the world today. And these specimens are so useful for research because they capture something that we call the phenotype, which is the assembly of different kinds of traits of the individual. So the size and color and shape and all that sort of thing of the individual is what we call its phenotype. So for example, here are two specimens of a magnificent riflebird. Is it possible to get the lights down slightly? Thanks, Kathleen. These are two specimens, male and a female, male-female, of a magnificent riflebird. So this is a species from northern Australia, Cape York area. And from these specimens, you can measure the bill size and the plumage color and how big its middle toe is and all those sorts of things for looking at variation in those sorts of traits over time and space. And with expanding technologies that we have today, these specimens becoming more and more valuable for all sorts of kinds of research that were never dreamed of when the specimens were first collected. So now you can use micrographs to look at the fine structure of the feathers. You can do CT scans to look at the internal structures. You can extract chemicals, isotopes from the feathers to look at diet and where the bird was when it melted in the feather and things like that. You can even extract DNA from the feathers and do genomic studies. So there are all sorts of things that you can use these specimens for, and there's sort of actually a quiet renaissance going on in the field of ornithology right now as people learn new and different ways to use specimens for addressing bigger and bigger questions. But the thing I want to emphasize today is that as valuable as a specimen, specimens like these are for this kind of research, they do have one serious shortcoming, and that is they don't actually capture all aspects of the individual phenotype. They don't capture all traits. For example, those beautiful specimens of the magnificent riflebird do not capture this. So this is behavior, right? This is how a male riflebird courts a female riflebird, and this is how she reacts, which to me, her reaction is sort of nonplussed and slightly nervous. But we can see from a video like this, we can see how these two individuals interact. We can see what the male does with those feathers. And I don't know if you can quite hear it because it's a little quiet, but you can hear the wings moving. Those wings are modified so that the feathers brushing against each other make noise, right? So that's part of the display is the sound as well as the movement. So these sorts of traits, behavioral traits, whether it be courtship or foraging behavior or parental care or whatever, are things that a physical specimen simply cannot capture. It's just not possible. Fortunately, though, we now have the technology to capture those sorts of traits because we have audio recordings, we have video recordings. In fact, Audubon himself, we know him for painting. The reason Audubon painted is he was interested in capturing the behavior of birds. He used the technology that was available at the time, which was a canvas and paints. He didn't have a camcorder. But if he had, I guarantee it that he would have been out there filming birds as well as painting them. Here's another behavior. Now this is the same species, magnificent riflebird from the southern end of Cape York Peninsula. So that's his call, the whoop, whoop. Same species farther north in Cape York. He has a different call, right? This is woo, woo instead of whoop, whoop. It's woo, woo. That's different, right? That's the kind of thing that evolutionary biologists and ornithologists are interested in, and ecologists. We want to know what is the variation over time and over space in these sorts of traits, and what accounts for that variation? What's the cause and what are the consequences of that variation? So that's the sort of thing that a lot of us are very interested in studying, and we can do that with these sorts of recordings, which I call media specimens, or digital media specimens. So what the Macaulay Library is, it's not a library like Mann Library. So I think you accidentally invited me because you think I run a library, so I appreciate that. But the Macaulay Library is actually much more akin to the Museum of Vertebrates on campus or the Smithsonian Collection or some other biological collection you may be familiar with. We are a collection of specimens that capture the traits of organisms, but the specimens we have are audio and video recordings rather than skin and bones. So that's the main difference. We are a biological research collection. We have over 250,000 of these specimens now, and growing rapidly. And these specimens are used for a wide array of research. So this musician wren that you're listening to is just one example. They're beautiful, they're wonderful to listen to, but they're also scientifically valuable for research. Yes?
Excuse me, is that Ted Parker?
This is Ted Parker. This is his recording.
Yeah, I saw the recording.
Yeah, and so those of you who, by the way, I invite you to ask questions during this. If I don't get to my last slide, I'm good with that. You know, I threw this together. This is a small crowd. Let's just be chatty. So yeah, this is Ted Parker. Ted Parker is one of the better known audio recordists from back in time.
They can't get the video without you using a mic.
Okay. But I'm so
Is that
loud.
okay? You want the clip one?
Hello? Does this work? Okay. Ted Parker is the person who has contributed the most recordings to the Macaulay Library. We have about 10,000 of his recordings. We would probably have 3 times that if he weren't tragically killed in a plane accident in South America when he was doing conservation biological survey work. So he was killed at a very young age doing the work he loved to do. And we're very fortunate to have his recordings in the Macaulay, and they're just beautiful. That musician Wren, you just can't beat that as far as I'm concerned. So what I wanted to do today is give you 3 short stories. I'm going to talk about old school approaches using media. I'm going to talk about new school approaches and what I call future school, like where I think we're headed to. So for old school, I want to start with Arthur Allen himself. Arthur Allen is the founder of the Lab of Ornithology. By the way, the lab, if you haven't been to the Lab of Ornithology, it's only about 3 miles from here. I really strongly encourage you to visit. It's a lovely spot. The trails in Sapsucker Woods are wonderful for roaming around, but go inside as well. There's some interesting stuff inside. So Arthur Allen started the Lab of O in 1915 is the date we use. And in 1929, he was approached by some folks who were interested in testing a new technology at the time. Other than Randy, does anybody know what that technology was?
Parabolic sound.
Oh, that's a great guess, because parabolic sound recorder devices were basically developed at Cornell, but it predates that. No, it was talkie films. Movies with sound synced audio were developed in this area, and the people who developed those were interested in testing the technology. And so they went to this bird guy and asked him, do you think that we could actually film birds singing? And he said, I don't know, but let's try. And so they went to Stewart Park down the hill here, and they filmed 3 birds singing, including this rose-breasted grosbeak. You're listening to the earliest recording of a bird singing that was ever made. And it was made right here in Ithaca, New York. So they did rose-breasted grosbeak, a song sparrow. What was the third one, Randy? A house wren? Yeah, a house wren. So those are the 3 birds that were recorded that morning. We still have 2 of those recordings. One of them has disappeared. But the movie people are great. This is wonderful. Our thing works. Thank you. Goodbye. But Arthur Allen, this light bulb went on over his head, and he said, you know what? We can use this technology to document the diversity of life on Earth. We can document the sounds of birds and frogs and insects. And he set out as part of his mission of the Lab of O to do just that. Film, at the time the collection was all filmed, rather than, magnetic tape wasn't even developed till World War II. And I forgot what I was going to say, but anyway, so he set about recording and documenting the diversity of life on film, and that was the start of the Macaulay Library, which at the time was called the Library of Natural Sounds, right? So that's what I wanted to say. And they quickly realized that these sorts of media could be used for research. So what you hear now, I hope. So that's a ruffed grouse. This is a picture of a ruffed grouse. So it's a ruffed grouse male displaying. And back in the 30s and before, there was a debate about how such a smallish bird, I mean, it's actually a good-sized bird, chicken size, but how it could make such a deep pitched sound, because in animals, by and large, there's a strong correlation between the pitch of a sound that an animal makes and its body size. And these grouse just aren't that big, so how could it make such a deep, reverberating sound? And so they actually set out to test this to figure out how the animals did it by setting up a camera and a microphone near a ruffed grouse drumming log. This is Peter Kellogg, who participated in this. And Randy can correct me. This is the story I heard. So Randy Little, if you want to know about the history of the Lab of O, he's the man to talk about, because he literally wrote the book about the history of the Lab of O. So he'll correct me when I get this wrong, but they put the microphone and the camera on there, but they didn't have a remote control or anything like that. So Kellogg had to lay next to the log, and they put leaves over the top of them, and he waited until the grouse started drumming, and he hit record, right? Is that a true story?
far as I wasn't there.
Okay, yeah. Neither was I, but that's the story I heard. So anyway, they obtained this material, and using this, they showed that what the male is doing is he's compressing air against his chest with his wings, and so the popping you hear is actually sort of what you do with your fingers when you snap them. It's compressed air giving off energy. And he does that faster and faster and faster, and that's the drumming. And these films were used for a scientific publication, the very first paper that ever used these sorts of media to answer a biological question. And that was 1930-something or other.
And Mike, they proved one other thing with the film.
Yeah?
When people saw the bird in action, they thought, well, it's thumping its chest.
Right. But they showed the wings don't actually hit the chest,
Exactly.
right? Yeah, so they got just the right angle that you can see. It's not doing this, right? It's doing this, but faster than I can, and so I can't make the same noise. So nowadays we have other technological advances and analytical advances that help us study sound in sort of more sophisticated ways. And one of the big breakthroughs in doing this sort of research is the spectrogram or the sonogram, which is a picture of the sound that the animal makes. So here's a song sparrow. This is a picture, a spectrogram of the song sparrow. And I'll play it in a second, but what you can do is these blue blobs here are the notes, and the more blue it is, the more intense the sound is, the higher the amplitude. And so you can see there's a high note, a low note, a high note, a low note, a high note, and sort of a trill, whir, buzz, right? So listen to high, low, high, trill, whir, buzz is what you're going to hear. So, you know, after you look at these, you can read them the way I just did. You know, I know what this bird sounds like just by looking at this. See? High, low, high, trill, whir, buzz. Here it is slowed down. Right? So you can train your eye to go along with your ear so that you can both see and hear the sounds, which is a useful thing because humans are much more visual. We're a very visual species. So it's nice to be able to see it. But the other thing you can do when you turn it into a spectrogram like this is you can measure it. So you can look at the maximum frequency, the lowest frequency, the trill rate, things like that. Here's another one. All right, so this is wood thrush, a common bird around here. Here it is slowed down, which is fun to do. This is a more accurate way. For me, this is more like the way the bird hears it, because birds have better separation of notes. So because of the way the bird's ear and neurology is structured, they can separate notes in the temporal domain better than we can. So notes that blur together in our ear, they can separate. So the thing I love about it also it's like sort of outer spacey. You know, there's great sound effects for the 1950s sci-fi movies. Here's one I love. I spent my dissertation work here at Cornell studying oripendulus, so it's one of my favorite birds and one of my favorite sounds. So that's a vocalization. Now I want you to listen to this one slowed down, and all I want you to think is, how does this bird make this sound? I mean, it's just like going down a harp, right, and plucking the strings. I have no idea how that is done. I have absolutely no idea, but it's a great research question. I hope, you know, some graduate student answers this question sometime soon. Video is also something, more recently, of course, has been incorporated into research in a lot of different ways. Probably the most common way that video is used is to do this sort of thing. So this is from our own research of warblers. We study black-throated blue warblers in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, and we put cameras out on nests so that we can watch feeding rates, how often the male and female come to the nest, what they bring, how the nestlings grow, things like that. And then we can relate those sorts of things to food abundance. We can relate it to weather conditions. We can relate it to territory quality, those sorts of things. And so using And here's the males coming. And you can see everyone's color banded so we know who's who. Using these sorts of videos, we've discovered, for example, the males who have young in the nest that they haven't sired, so we call these extra pair young, so they've been sired biologically by some other male in the population, those males feed at lower rates. So somehow they're able to know that the nestlings, some of the nestlings in the nest are not their own, and they reduce their parental care so it's less costly for them. So these kinds of videos are really useful for that sort of thing. And a host of other questions, and lots of people now put cameras on nests or feeding sites or what have you to collect basic ecological data. Sometimes you get surprising things. So here's one of our nests. Can you tell what that is? It's not a bird. It's a black bear. Snout. It's a black bear's snout. And now, so that's not good for the camera. So this bear just depredated the nest, so he ate the nestlings, and now he's trying to figure out what this tripod thing was that was next to the nest. Just watch. That's as close to a bear snout as you ever want to get. And if you keep watching this, what happens is he drags the camera away. You watch the woods go by as he's dragging it away. It took us a while, but we called this our bear witch video, by the way. It took us a long time, but we did find the camera. He dropped it eventually, and that's we were able. It didn't end well.
It was recorded in Danby, wasn't it?
No, this is in New Hampshire, but it could have been in Danby, yeah. Okay, so those are the ways that traditionally audio recordings and video have been used for years. And what I want to do now is highlight some of the newer ways that these are being used and sort of some of the innovations that people are coming up with to use these to address ever better questions. So for this, I want to leave Ithaca now and go down to Ecuador. And if you do that, this is one of the birds you may encounter, the club-winged manakin. And the sound you're hearing is a manakin. So that sort of tick-ting, that's the male manakin's call. This is what the spectrogram looks like. So here's the tick, and here's the ting, so it's longer. It's a harmonic stack, so there's a fundamental frequency, and these are all harmonics of that fundamental frequency. And the fundamental, the lowest pitched part of that call is about 1.5 kilohertz, right? So 1.5 kilohertz. And so the question is, how does this bird make this sound? It's a very simple call. You know, it's not like the elaborate wood thrush that we were listening to a minute ago. It's just really a tick-ting. And so Kim Bostwick, who was at the Cornell Museum of Vertebrates here, was interested in that question. How does this bird make this sound? And here's a video of a male giving the call. This might be slightly quiet. The audio is not loud on this, but you can kind of hear it, right? So every time he makes the tick-ting, he's lifting his wings. There's another male in the background calling too. And he's also doing a little bit of a display. So that's curious. You know, why would he lift his wings every time he does the display? So Kim's hypothesis was that he's actually using his wings to make that noise rather than it being a vocalization, it's some sort of mechanical sound. So what she did is she went and took a high speed, an ultra high speed camera down to Ecuador and filmed some males singing. So here's a male. So this is the ting, the ting. He's beating his wings behind his back very, very rapidly. There's 100 beats per second. That's faster than a hummingbird beats its wings. So 100 beats per second he's beating. Every time he does, there's on the feathers, two of his wing feathers are modified so that one has 7 bumps on it and the other one has a single bump. So the 7 rub against the 1, and it's like a cricket rubbing its file against the rasper. And so if you do the math, every time there's a single beat, there's 7 forward and 7 back, so there's 14 beats. And if you do that 100 times per second, that's 1.4 something kilohertz. That's the exact pitch of that thing. So this is stridulation. It's a type of mechanical sound that the males use to sing. They don't do all their singing with their voice box.
1.4 kilohertz a human cannot hear.
So, no, we can.
That's a question, not a statement.
Yeah, no, we can hear that. In fact, so that tick-ting recording that we just heard we didn't modify that. So you heard the tick-ting, that was within our hearing. As some of us get older, we start to lose our higher frequency hearing. But if there were teenagers in this room, they'd be like, oh my God, that's so loud. But most of the rest of us strain to hear it, right?
Could you point a parabolic mic at different parts of the bird?
So that's a really good question. So parabolic mic, and I think we'll see pictures of them, they are a way of focusing the recording on in a particular direction, right? So they amplify the sound coming from one direction, cut out sounds coming from a different direction. They actually amplify the sound because they're magnifying the sound bouncing off the dish to the microphone, which is in the middle. To the best of my knowledge, I've never seen a parabolic mic that could be that precise. Like if it was an elephant, you might be able to get it, from front to back end, but that guy's this big, so you're not gonna be able to aim it that well. Maybe Randy might be able to. I can't.
No. I agree with you.
So here's another mannequin. This is a black mannequin, and now I just want to talk about innovations with video. This is about as boring a display as you ever see any mannequin give. He's just jumping up and down, right? And if you're familiar with mannequins or either seen them in the wild or on nature programming or something, they have extremely elaborate courtship displays where they do cartwheels and flips and all sorts of things like that. And so you look at that and you think, that's not even a respectable mannequin display. But if you film it at high speed and slow it down, this is what it looks like. The male's going to jump up right here. He actually does a flip on every one of, and I didn't believe it. So Lainey Day, the researcher who was the PI on this project, sent me this video. And I said, no, okay, maybe once in a while. And she said, no, he does it every time. So I went back to the video I showed first. And then on your computer, in QuickTime, you can go through frame by frame just by hitting the advance button. And I went through that whole movie, and he flips every time he jumps up. It's amazing. So that just shows you that these animals are doing things out there that are that don't necessarily, we don't realize how elaborate and how amazing they are. You have to, turn technology out there, either audio or video recordings, to get a better appreciation. And so this brings me to some work on birds of paradise that's been done by Ed Scholes, who works with me out at the Lab of O. He's a research associate out there. And Tim Lehman, who's a National Geographic photographer and also associated with Harvard. And Ed and Tim have been taking it on as their research mission in life to film courtship and other behaviors of every species of bird of paradise known. And in fact, they are going to New Guinea on, Ed's packing his bags right now because he leaves Tuesday or Wednesday next week to go to New Guinea to get film for what we think is an undescribed species of bird of paradise. So they're going to get some video of this thing displaying and come back with that, and we'll check it out and see if it really is. But anyway, so they've been filming all of these different birds of paradise, which are spectacular birds. There's a lot of really cool educational outreach you can do with these films. But they're also doing science with these films. So just as an example, here's one species, Wans parodia. This is a painting of it. This is a male displaying. And it's this amazing display, right? He lifts his skirt. In fact, this display is called the ballerina dance, right? That's the name we use for it because it looks like there's a tutu. And so he's displaying. But what Ed and Tim realized is that the female isn't looking from the side the way we are through this camera. The female sits on this vine above the displaying male. And so they got curious about, well, what's this display look like to a female? She's not looking from that angle. So here's a page from their notebook where they figured out how they could do this. They used 3 cameras, 2 on either side, and one from above that they mount to a tree so they can get the female eye view. And they synchronized all three of these cameras so they could film the bird from all three angles simultaneously and see not only what the female is seeing, but also with the modern computers, you can take those three cameras and build a virtual reality version of the display court. And so this is the same video you saw before is right here. This is the female's view. So she's seeing this big black dinner plate, right? And here's the important part. So that flash, he's going to do it again. So right there, you don't see that unless you're where the female is. It's a highly directional iridescent color made up of structural coloration, like hummingbird throats. You know, you only see the color from a certain direction. So in the middle of his display, he squats his head down like that, that thrusts those feathers out, and there's a flash up at the female. And we wouldn't have known that except for those guys had the insight of, hey, let's put a camera overhead where the female sits. And so now what they're doing is they've teamed up with Todd Harvey, who's a Hollywood-trained computer graphics animator guy. He did the skin on Gollum in The Lord of the Rings. And they're creating a virtual reality from these three camera views, and so that they can model the position of the female's eye, the male trait, that throat thing, the ambient light all around, so they can see if you change the light angle. So they're using this virtual reality to conduct virtual experiments, essentially. So they can move the female, move the lighting conditions, move the male. They can do whatever they want in this virtual reality. It looks something like this. And look at the effects on the signal to the female. Yes?
How often are these media collections accompanied by physical collections?
Oh, that's a great question. The answer is, in the past, not a lot, but we're actively promoting and facilitating collection expeditions that collect both. So media. In fact, I was going to mention this at the end, I'll mention it right now, in partnership with the Museum of Vertebrates here on campus, as well as other collections elsewhere, we're sending Cornell students out to do this sort of collecting. Right now, there's a couple of students with Vanya Rohrer, who's the curator of birds and mammals. They're in the Midwest, and they're sampling hybrid zones of towhees and orioles and things like that, where the eastern and western forms come together. Vanya is collecting the specimens for analysis of anatomy and things like that, but the students are collecting audio recordings and in some case video to get the behaviors that are associated with that, so we can look at how those things change across that hybrid zone.
What about that beginning expedition?
So this one, these birds were not collected, but there were specimens used. So to do this work, they needed to know how the feathers reflect from different light angles. There is a specimen of this bird at the AMNH in New York. So they went down to New York, or no, they shipped the bird up here, and in the computer science, one of the computer science rooms here on campus, I can't remember which one, they have this fancy contraption that can take pictures from all angles, and you vary the light and angle, so they could get measurements of exactly the color that's given off by a barbule, a little teeny piece of that feather from under different lighting conditions. And they're using that in this modeling, right, that information. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to talk about is where I see some of this going. So one obvious thing that's going to keep happening is this sort of technological innovation, as computer scientists get interested in these sorts of approaches and put their brain power to figuring out better ways of analyzing and even in some cases collecting this material. That's one thing that's definitely happening now and will continue to happen into the future. But the other big thing that's happening is broadening participation. There's more and more people involved in collecting and sometimes even analyzing this material. So just to set that up, this is a lyrebird in the Blue Mountains of Australia. This is a movie that was collected by my former postdoc, Anna Dalziel, who studies lyrebirds. She's down there now. And this is a male displaying on his court. That sort of robotic sound is a lyrebird specific sound. He also does a lot of mimicry. And the thing I want you to notice is as he vocalizes, he dances. And there's a coordination of the movement and his vocalization. So the side steps go with a particular vocalization. He does these hops that go with a different vocalization. That's his tail, by the way, that's over his head. Isn't that amazing? And then he goes back into the sidestep vocalization, does the sidesteps. So she's doing some really cool research with it. I actually don't want to talk about her research right now. What I want to say is she collected this video with a GoPro, right? She put a GoPro on a tree next to the display court and did that to about 12 other males. And she's collecting data with these things that skateboarders put on their heads. These cameras that are really inexpensive but can take high def video. And this kind of approach is because the technology is getting so good and so cheap, it's lowering the bar, the threshold of participation in this kind of stuff. And so now there's sort of a cottage industry of people out there who are interested in wildlife cams, right? So they put these cameras in their backyard and see what kind of raccoons go through at night, and that sort of thing. And these are popping up all over the world, and they're collecting really good biodiversity data. So, here you see all sorts of cool things wandering by. This is one in Ecuador. And so this is a great way of surveying diversity in a particular area. You can also do acoustic surveys by putting up not a camera, but an automated recorder and seeing what's calling at any particular time and get good biodiversity data from these various areas. But these also collect behavioral data. So anyone who's interested in behavior can study these. So the Lab of Ornithology has a whole bunch of nest cams and bird cams out all over the place. One of the first ones we did was our heron cam, which was trained on the heron nest that used to be right outside of the Lab of O in the big pond there. It fell, it's no longer there, but it was a very popular camera for a long time, and it got some awesome video, awesome. There's a parent feeding the young. So they're trying to get mom or dad, whoever it is, to regurgitate some fish, right? And here comes dinner. They go crazy. And then they're done, right? One thing I want to point out is there's five young herons here. That number becomes important in the next slide. But anyway, we have hours and hours and hours and hours of video from this one nest. And we have heaps of cameras up on other nests or displaying male bowerbirds or whatever. So there's all sorts of data being collected all around the world in very sort of easy yet sophisticated kinds of ways nowadays. Here's the same nest, but at night. The parent is on the nest. That was a great horned owl. So that was an attempted predation event where the owl tried to come in and get one of the eggs, but the parent was guarding it. I just want to point out there are 5 eggs here, so all 5 young made it through that predation event. So in case you were worried.
Does the black bear show up?
The black bear it'd be a really agile black bear to get up to that nest. Predation is part of nature, and it's so like I showed with the bear and with this, but it's also a very rare event. You almost never see it actually happening. But by putting these kinds of cameras out and things like that, we can actually get data on how does it happen, when does it happen, how does the parent defend the nest? In this case, the parent fended off the predator, so it was a happy ending. Not for the predator. But this sort of monitoring can also be done acoustically, and people are now building these flower pot microphones and putting them on their roofs. It's like a hobby for a lot of people. And these are very directional. They're sort of like a parabolic mic, but they're made out of a flower pot. And what they record is the things that fly over the house. And conveniently, birds that are migrating, many birds migrate at night, especially small songbirds. And while they're doing that, they're constantly giving little calls to keep in contact with each other so the group can stay together. And those calls are species specific. And so these are 4 different warblers, and you can see from these little sonograms that each one has a different shaped call note. And if we know what those call notes are, and we do because we have basically a dictionary of call notes in the lab of ornithology, people can translate these things to know that it was a redstart that flew over that night, or a flock of redstarts. And so these things are being used now to monitor migration activity. You know, which nights do get the most migration? What routes? Which houses? Do you see more migration near cities or away from cities? Those sorts of questions we can address now through this sort of public participation in monitoring migratory birds. And so this sort of photography, audio recording, this is becoming a very popular thing, not just for researchers and scientists, but also for hobbyists. And so we, at the Lab of O, we conduct a lot of workshops to train people on how to collect good recordings. And we've started to realize, fairly recently actually, that iPhones are pretty good recorders and getting better, and that most people are going to, if they get a recording at all, probably be with an iPhone. So we've been figuring out how can you make good recordings with an iPhone. We have information on our website, for example, to tell you, okay, if you want to use your iPhone, it's better to use this. You get a better recording. But if you want to use your iPhone, here's how you can do it. And here's just to show what you can get. This is an iPhone video that some guy, you can hear people in the background. He's just sitting at a cafe eating, and he notices these gulls. And so he videos them, and he's like, what in the heck are they doing? Does anyone have a guess?
Has something to do with mating.
No, it's not mating. That was my first guess, too. They're bringing up food. You know, it's called, if you do that on the ground, insects come to the surface. I don't know if this is really true, but what they say is they think it's raining, so they come up. And that's what these gulls are doing. They're worming. So they beat their feet on the ground. It brings insects up, and they eat them. I had no idea that gulls do this until I saw this guy's iPhone video. I mean, this is the kind of thing that we can get by having a lot of people out there paying attention and recording. So I'll just, one more thing, and then I'll be done. This is a video, a film actually, that's been digitized of the imperial woodpecker. So it's not a great film. It's kind of shaky. Bill Ryan, who made this film, could have used a tripod. But this is a really important film because this is an extinct species. This was the largest woodpecker we know of that ever existed. It was about 2 feet tall. It dwarfed the ivory-billed woodpecker. It was still existing in Mexico, central Mexico, in the 1950s, but there were very few left, and he realized these guys aren't going to be around much longer. He went there and he filmed them, and because he did that, we now know how this extinct bird foraged, how it cocked its head, how it flew from one tree to another. We actually know what the behavior of this extinct animal was like. This is super valuable, right? And so our goal at the Lab of O is to produce a lot more Bill Ryans. We want to facilitate and get people enthusiastic about going out and collecting this sort of material, audio and or video, and documenting the diversity of nature so that we hopefully aren't watching extinct species, but so that we can know about the diversity of life on our planet and understand the behavior a little bit better. And so we're working a lot with Cornell students as well as others who are not here at Cornell. And I have to say, since this is Alumni Weekend, I have to say I am very proud to be at an institution that values this kind of research and that actively trains students to go out and do it. So these are students who participated in a project on verdin in southern Arizona this last spring with Dr. Emma Gregg, who runs that project. Right now I have students in Australia. We take students to the White Mountains in New Hampshire. We have some of the best and the brightest students who love nature come to Cornell to do the biology they want to do, but also rub elbows with computer scientists and acoustic audio engineers and those kinds of people who are developing these better techniques. So it's a great place to do this kind of work. We have great students who are enthusiastic about it. So I'm really happy about that. And I guess with that, I'll just invite you to check out the exhibit upstairs, which is all about that, students collecting specimens and audio and video recordings for science. So thank you very much.
This has been a production of Cornell University Library.